License and registration don't prove anything.
Whose car is this?
Oh, there's no way you own a Lamborghini like this.
My car. My name is on the registration you just looked at.
I need to search this vehicle. Step aside. I'm checking for drugs, weapons, anything illegal in there.
You don't have probable cause. I don't consent to any search. I'm saying that clearly for your body cam. You're acting nervous.
Hashtag racist cop illegally searches black man's Lamborghini Urus. Unaware he's the new police chief, Officer Travis Bennett, badge number 6147 with 10 years on the force, saw a black man driving a Lamborghini Urus through an upscale neighborhood and immediately assumed the vehicle was either stolen or connected to drug dealing. He pulled the car over without any traffic violation, demanded the driver exit the vehicle, and began conducting an illegal search without consent or probable cause, dismissing the driver's calm objections as suspicious resistance. When Marcus Thompson calmly explained he owned the vehicle and showed his registration and driver's license matching perfectly, Bennett called it insufficient and continued his search, claiming he smelled marijuana despite Thompson being completely sober and the car being clean. Despite Thompson's repeated citations of his Fourth Amendment rights and his clear statement that the search was illegal, Bennett ignored him and called for a K-9 unit to justify his baseless suspicions. What Bennett didn't know was that he had just illegally detained and searched his new police chief, who was starting his position in exactly 72 hours, that the entire interaction was being recorded on Bennett's own body camera and by Thompson's dashboard camera, and that his decision to violate the constitutional rights of a black man in an expensive car would end with immediate termination, criminal charges for civil rights violations, a $2.8 million settlement, and viral footage with 112 million views that would force the entire department to confront decades of racial profiling that had been tolerated and enabled by a broken culture of impunity. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe driving an expensive car while black shouldn't result in an illegal search, then like this video and subscribe. Marcus Thompson had spent the last 3 months preparing for his new position as chief of police for a mid-sized city of 250,000 residents. At 51 years old, Thompson was a 28-year law enforcement veteran with an impeccable record of service, progressive reforms, and community-oriented policing. He'd risen through the ranks in a neighboring city from patrol officer to deputy chief, earning a master's degree in criminal justice along the way and building a reputation as someone who held officers accountable while supporting professional policing practices. When the city council had recruited Thompson to become their new chief of police, it was specifically because they wanted someone who would reform a department that had been plagued by excessive force complaints, racial profiling allegations, and a culture of protecting problematic officers. Thompson's appointment had been announced publicly 2 months ago. His photo had been in the newspaper. His hiring had been covered by local news. Anyone who paid attention to local affairs knew that Marcus Thompson would be taking over as chief of police in 3 days. Thompson had purchased the Lamborghini Urus 6 months earlier, a $240,000 luxury SUV that represented both his success and his love of high-performance vehicles. He'd earned the money through years of careful investing, side consulting work on police policy, and book royalties from a well-regarded text on constitutional policing that was used in police academies across the country. The car was registered in his name, insured in his name, and carried no liens or legal issues whatsoever. On this Thursday afternoon, Thompson was driving through the city he would soon lead, familiarizing himself with different neighborhoods, getting a sense of the community he'd be serving. He was dressed casually in jeans, a polo shirt, and a light jacket, looking like any professional enjoying a day off. He was 3 days away from being sworn in as chief, 3 days away from being the boss of every officer in this department, including the one who was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. Officer Travis Bennett had been patrolling this upscale neighborhood for 4 years, and in his mind, he knew exactly what a Lamborghini driven by a black man meant. Either the car was stolen, or the driver was a drug dealer. In Bennett's 10-year career, he'd developed a pattern of stopping expensive cars driven by people of color, always finding some justification, always convinced that his instincts were valid despite the fact that his searches almost never found contraband or evidence of crimes. When Bennett saw the pearl-white Lamborghini Urus pass him going exactly the speed limit, signaling properly, committing no traffic infractions whatsoever. Every biased alarm in his mind started ringing. He pulled out and followed for 2 blocks, looking for any violation to justify a stop. Thompson drove perfectly, no speeding, no failure to signal, no equipment violations. So Bennett simply activated his lights anyway and pulled Thompson over based on nothing but his assumption that something must be wrong. Thompson saw the lights, sighed heavily, and pulled over to the curb. He'd been a police officer long enough to know exactly what was happening. He'd also been a black man his entire life and had experienced this scenario before, though never in a city where he was about to become the chief of police. He put the Lamborghini in park, turned off the engine, placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and waited. His dashboard camera automatically activated when he was pulled over, capturing everything that was about to unfold. Bennett approached the driver's side window with his hand resting on his weapon, his body language already aggressive despite having no information about who he'd stopped or why. Thompson lowered his window and kept his hands visible on the wheel. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Bennett said, his tone already accusatory rather than professional. "Of course, officer," Thompson said calmly. "May I ask why you stopped me? I don't believe I was violating any traffic laws." "I'll ask the questions," Bennett snapped. "License, registration, insurance. Now." Thompson reached slowly for his wallet, narrating his movements. "I'm reaching for my wallet in my back pocket. My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. I'll get those after I hand you my license." He extracted his driver's license and handed it to Bennett. The license clearly showed Marcus Thompson, the address where he'd just bought a house in preparation for his new position, and a photo that matched the man sitting in the driver's seat. Bennett barely glanced at it. "This your car?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already didn't believe it. "Yes, it's my car," Thompson replied evenly. "The registration in the glove compartment will show that it's registered to me at that address." "Step out of the vehicle," Bennett ordered. Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Officer, I've committed no traffic violation. You haven't articulated any reason for this stop. I'm not required to exit my vehicle unless you have reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. What is the basis for this stop?" Bennett's face flushed with anger at being questioned. "I said step out of the vehicle. You can do it voluntarily or I can remove you. Your choice." Thompson made a decision. He would comply, he would document everything, and he would let this officer dig his own grave. "I'm complying under protest," Thompson said clearly, knowing his dashboard camera was recording. "I'm exiting the vehicle now." He opened the door and stepped out, keeping his hands visible. He was 6 feet 2 inches and carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd spent nearly 3 decades in law enforcement. Bennett, at 5 feet 10 inches, immediately felt the need to assert his authority more aggressively. "Hands on the hood," Bennett ordered. "I'm going to search your vehicle." "You don't have consent to search my vehicle," Thompson said firmly but calmly. "I don't consent to any search. You have no probable cause. This is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights." "I don't need your consent," Bennett said. "I smell marijuana. That gives me probable cause." Thompson's jaw tightened. "Officer, there is no marijuana in this vehicle. I don't use marijuana. You're fabricating probable cause to justify an illegal search. I'm stating clearly and for the record, I do not consent to any search of my vehicle or my person." Bennett ignored him completely and began searching the Lamborghini, rifling through the glove compartment, pulling out the registration that clearly showed the car was registered to Marcus Thompson, tossing it aside and continuing his search. He went through the center console, the door pockets, under the seats, and even popped the hood to look in the engine compartment. Thompson stood with his hands on the hood, his face a mask of controlled fury, watching this officer violate his constitutional rights while searching for non-existent contraband in a desperate attempt to justify a baseless stop. A second patrol car pulled up. The officer who emerged, a younger white woman named Jessica Martinez, approached cautiously. She'd only been on the force for 3 years, but had already developed concerns about Bennett's pattern of stops. "Bennett, what's the situation?" she asked. Suspicious subject in a high-value vehicle, Bennett said, still searching. Smelled marijuana. Conducting a probable cause search. Martinez looked at Thompson, who met her eyes with a steady gaze that made her uncomfortable. Something about this man's bearing, his calm despite the humiliation of being searched, suggested this was not going to end well for Bennett. "Sir," Martinez said to Thompson, "can you tell me what happened?" "Officer Bennett pulled me over despite the fact that I committed no traffic violation," Thompson said, his voice level and precise. "He demanded I exit my vehicle. He claimed to smell marijuana, which is false. He's conducting an illegal search without consent or legitimate probable cause. I've stated multiple times that I do not consent to this search. My dashboard camera is recording everything." Martinez's eyes widened slightly. "You have a dash cam?" "I do. It activated automatically when I was pulled over. It has audio and video of the entire interaction, including Officer Bennett's fabricated claim of smelling marijuana and his illegal search." Bennett, overhearing this, finally stopped searching and turned to Thompson with growing suspicion. "Who are you?" he demanded. Thompson reached slowly into his jacket pocket. "I'm reaching for my credentials," he said, pulling out a leather badge case. He flipped it open to reveal his police credentials from his previous department, showing his rank as deputy chief, along with a letter of appointment on official city letterhead identifying him as the incoming chief of police scheduled to start in 3 days. Bennett stared at the credentials, his face going from red to pale in seconds. Martinez leaned in to look, and her expression went from concerned to horrified. "You're—" Bennett couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm Marcus Thompson," Thompson said, his voice now carrying unmistakable authority. "I'm your new chief of police. I start on Monday. You just conducted an illegal traffic stop on your new boss. You fabricated probable cause. You searched my vehicle without consent or legitimate legal justification. You violated my Fourth Amendment rights. And you did it all on your body camera and my dashboard camera." Bennett stood frozen, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd just done. Martinez took 2 steps back, clearly wanting to be as far from this disaster as possible. "Sir, I didn't know," Bennett started. "You didn't know because you didn't ask." Thompson cut him off, his voice sharp as a blade. "You saw a black man in an expensive car and you assumed criminality. You had no traffic violation. You had no reasonable suspicion. You had nothing but your racist assumptions, and you acted on them. The fact that I'm a police officer, that I'm about to be your chief, doesn't change what you did. It just means you picked the absolute wrong person to violate." Bennett tried again. "If I'd known you were a cop—" "That's exactly the problem," Thompson said, his voice rising slightly. "You should treat every citizen with the same respect and constitutional protections you'd give to another cop. The Fourth Amendment doesn't only apply to police officers. It applies to everyone. You violated my rights. The fact that I have a badge doesn't make the violation worse. It just means I know exactly what you did wrong, and I have the authority to do something about it." Martinez spoke up hesitantly. "Sir, what do you want us to do?" Thompson looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "Officer Martinez, I want you to remember this moment. Remember what happens when officers act on assumptions instead of evidence. As for Officer Bennett, he's going to return to the station, he's going to secure all body camera footage from this stop, and he's going to wait to hear from internal affairs. Because I guarantee you that within an hour of me making a phone call, there will be an investigation opened." Bennett found his voice, now defensive and angry. "I was just doing my job. You fit the profile. I fit the profile." Thompson's voice was dangerous now. "The profile of what? A black man who has the audacity to own a nice car? That's not a profile, Officer Bennett. That's racism. And it's going to cost you your career." A third patrol car arrived, and the officer who stepped out immediately recognized Thompson from the news coverage of his appointment. Sergeant David Cole had actually been looking forward to working under Thompson's leadership. Now he stood on the side of the road watching his soon-to-be chief of police standing next to his illegally searched Lamborghini. "Chief Thompson," Cole said, his voice uncertain. Sergeant Cole, Thompson acknowledged. I'd prefer you call me Mr. Thompson for another 3 days, since I'm not officially your chief yet. But yes, it's me. And Officer Bennett just pulled me over without cause and illegally searched my vehicle. Cole's face showed he understood immediately how catastrophic this was. Sir, what do you need from me? I need you to ensure that all body camera footage from this stop is preserved. I need you to make sure Officer Bennett doesn't have any opportunity to delete or alter anything. And I need you to contact whoever is currently acting as chief and inform them that I'll be filing a formal complaint first thing tomorrow morning. Thompson got back in his Lamborghini, started the engine, and looked at Bennett one more time through the window. Monday morning, Officer Bennett. When I walk into that department as your chief, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about constitutional policing, racial profiling, and the consequences of both. He drove away, leaving 3 officers standing on the side of the road, 2 of them knowing they just witnessed a career-ending mistake, and one of them still not fully grasping that his 10-year career in law enforcement was effectively over. The investigation that followed moved with remarkable speed. Thompson filed his formal complaint the next morning. The acting chief, who had been thrilled to be handing over a troubled department to someone with Thompson's credentials, was horrified to learn that one of his officers had illegally searched the incoming chief. The body camera footage and Thompson's dashboard camera footage were both secured and reviewed. The videos showed everything. Bennett pulling over a car that had committed no violation, Bennett's aggressive demands despite Thompson's calm compliance, Bennett's fabricated claim of smelling marijuana, Bennett's illegal search despite Thompson's clear refusal to consent, and the moment Bennett realized he'd just violated the constitutional rights of his new boss. But the investigation went further. Internal Affairs pulled Bennett's entire 10-year history and found a pattern that was both extensive and damning. Bennett had made 267 traffic stops over the past 5 years. Of those stops, 198 involved drivers of color, a rate of 74% despite his patrol area being only 35% minority population. Of the 198 stops of minority drivers, 156 resulted in vehicle searches. Of the 69 stops of white drivers, only 12 resulted in searches. Bennett's search rate for minority drivers was 79% compared to 17% for white drivers. His smell of marijuana justification appeared in 89 reports involving minority drivers and only 3 reports involving white drivers. His contraband discovery rate, the actual percentage of searches that found drugs or other illegal items, was 7% for minority drivers and 8% for white drivers, proving that his suspicions had no basis in actual criminal activity. Most damning of all, internal emails showed that Bennett had received 4 formal complaints over the years alleging racial profiling. All 4 had been dismissed by supervisors without proper investigation. One supervisor had written, "Bennett is aggressive but effective. Complaints are normal for active officers." That email would later be used as evidence of supervisory failure to address obvious misconduct. The criminal charges came down within 2 weeks. Officer Travis Bennett was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal crime, illegal search and seizure, official misconduct, and filing false police reports. His report claimed Thompson was acting suspiciously and appeared nervous, neither of which was true on the video. The city council, eager to show their new chief that they supported reform, settled Thompson's civil rights lawsuit for $2.8 million before Thompson even formally started his position. The settlement included comprehensive reforms that Thompson himself helped draft. Immediate termination of any officer with statistical evidence of racial profiling, mandatory body cameras with footage automatically flagged when searches occur, independent review of all searches to ensure constitutional compliance, quarterly public reporting of stop and search data broken down by race, and creation of a civilian oversight board with real investigative power. Bennett was terminated immediately, losing his badge, his pension, and his career. His criminal trial lasted 4 weeks. The jury watched Bennett on body camera claiming to smell marijuana in a car that subsequent testing proved had 0 trace of marijuana. They heard Thompson's clear statements refusing consent to search. They saw Bennett search anyway. They reviewed the statistical evidence of Bennett's pattern of targeting minority drivers. The defense tried to argue that Bennett had made a good-faith mistake and that reasonable officers can disagree about probable cause. That argument collapsed when the prosecution presented Bennett's pattern of 267 stops showing systematic racial bias. One juror later said, "When we saw he'd searched nearly 80% of minority drivers but only 17% of white drivers, and his claim about smelling marijuana appeared almost exclusively in stops of black drivers, it was obvious this wasn't about probable cause. It was about racism." The jury convicted Bennett on all charges. At sentencing, the judge was direct. "Officer Bennett, you conducted an illegal search based on racial profiling. You fabricated probable cause. You violated the Fourth Amendment rights of a citizen who had committed no crime. The fact that citizen happened to be a police chief doesn't make your crime worse under law, but it does remove any doubt that you knew exactly what constitutional standards you were violating. You swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. You broke that oath repeatedly throughout your career. You did it because you believed your badge protected you from consequences. You were wrong." Bennett was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. At 42 years old, he would be 47 at his earliest release. The viral videos reached 112 million views combined. Thompson's dashboard camera footage, which he released publicly with commentary explaining each constitutional violation as it occurred, became a training video used in police academies across the country. The video showed a textbook example of racial profiling, fabricated probable cause, and illegal search, all narrated by someone who was about to become a police chief and who explained in precise legal terms exactly what was wrong with every step of Bennett's approach. Thompson took over as chief of police on schedule the following Monday. His first official act was to address the entire department in a mandatory meeting. He played the video of his traffic stop and used it as a teaching moment about what would and wouldn't be tolerated under his leadership. "Some of you might think Officer Bennett's mistake was searching me specifically," Thompson told his new department. "That's not the lesson here. Officer Bennett's mistake was conducting illegal searches based on racial bias, and he'd been doing it for years. The fact that he finally did it to someone who had the authority to hold him accountable doesn't change the fact that he violated the rights of hundreds of citizens before me. Under my leadership, that stops now. We serve everyone. We protect everyone's constitutional rights. And if you can't do this job without profiling people based on race, you won't do it in my department." Over his first 2 years as chief, Thompson terminated 23 officers for patterns of racial profiling, reformed the training program to emphasize constitutional policing, and reduced excessive force complaints by 67%. The department he inherited, which had been plagued by misconduct and community distrust, became a national model for reform. Thompson still drives his Lamborghini Urus. He's been stopped twice more since becoming chief, both times by officers from neighboring jurisdictions who didn't recognize him. Both times, when they saw his credentials, they immediately became apologetic and professional. Both times, Thompson filed formal complaints about the stops, noting that apologizing after seeing a badge isn't the same as treating all citizens respectfully from the start. 5 years after that Thursday afternoon, Travis Bennett was 47 years old, having served his full 5-year sentence and been released. He's now barred from law enforcement, works a minimum wage job, and remains a cautionary tale about what happens when racial bias guides policing. The lesson was permanent and expensive. Driving an expensive car while black isn't probable cause. The Fourth Amendment applies to everyone, not just people who can prove they deserve constitutional protections. Fabricating probable cause is a crime, not a legitimate police tactic. And officers who engage in racial profiling will eventually profile the wrong person and pay for it with everything they have. If you believe no one should be illegally searched for the crime of driving while black, share this story. What reforms would prevent officers from conducting searches based on race rather than evidence? Drop your solutions in the comments. And if you think 5 years in prison for violating a police chief's rights is exactly the accountability we need, subscribe because we're bringing you more stories where racial profiling meets consequences and destroys careers.